Sow the seeds of hard work and you will reap the fruits of success. Find something to do. Do it with all your concentration. You will excel.
We're facing a global scale chessboard.
The Chinese banking sector is facing a serious crisis. In just 1 week, 40 banks disappeared, and the collapse of Yizhang Bank of China has further deepened the sector's problems. Experts warn that the situation could have severe consequences for the global economy. We live in the most peaceful time in the world's history, and that's due to the debt-based system. You see, back 200, 300 years ago, when people needed more resources and they didn't have anything to trade, well, they go across borders and they conquer the country next to them and take their resources. This is going to happen again because this debt-based system is on the brink of destruction. And when you back somebody into a corner, they have no other choices but to act violently. You have to give somebody an out. And that's why I think the crypto world, I've said a few times, is the olive branch to the world. Because with a crypto-based system, you can create as many protocols as you need to, but each protocol has a fixed set of tokens. So you have the best of both worlds.
And one of the interesting things about the American empire is most Americans don't think America's an empire. They don't realize that the wealth they have derived decades of benefit from comes through this extended sphere of influence through maritime power that is an empire, not a colonial system, but a system that extracts dollar worth through democracies globally. And at the moment, that attitude has weakened the sphere of sort of American dollarization to the point where it's about to get very nasty for the American system. Because if you don't maintain your borders and your boundaries, then the systems within it that feed you basically disappear and you get less food. So I would argue that you need to choose your battles always. But America needs to understand what it really is. It's not a nation. It's a shadow empire. That's what it's been running since 1945. And because it hasn't realized it is a shadow empire, it's been prepared since Obama to see those boundaries squeezed. Now the margins that supplied the whole system are really, really skinny to the point of non-existent.
This is the dollar empire, and few understand. We export dollars all over the world. We flood the world with dollars. We force key commodities to be priced in dollars, make loans with interest that can't possibly be paid back. We saturate the world with dollars, and everyone is in debt to the U.S. This has been a strategy and will not end until something breaks. If you've been watching the bond market, you may have noticed that the credit spreads are widening. This is signs of danger to come.
Disturbs me about what he just said is that this can be done, should be done with a public-private partnership. Well, that's an insane statement. Public-private partnerships are things that shouldn't even exist. I'm not going off on a tangent here, but I've got to mention this. The U.S., in fact, most of the world, have fascist economic systems. People say, what are you talking about? Fascism? Fascism has nothing to do with jackboots and big flags and this type of thing. It's an economic system. The word fascism was coined by Benito Mussolini. And what it means is it's a partnership between the corporations and the state. And of course, fascism as a system treats people in corporations, big corporations, like Larry Fink, very well. But I think it's a bad thing.
We have seen a merger of large corporation and big government, while the mom and pop stores are decimated. This is not a good sign. And when the powers that be brag about private-public partnerships, they're bragging about fascist policies. This trend is not going to stop.
Continentally isolated, and there's a denial as to the very nature of American wealth, which is the shadow empire rather than the nation. And all of that requires action. Now, so far, Biden has been trying to dampen everything down, dampen the Ukraine conflict down, dampen everything that happens in the Middle East, even if it means sabotaging and betraying the allies that go with it, that actually, by undermining them, means you're more likely to be in conflict ultimately than not at all. And I agree with you. I think the only time America will realize it's a war is when China makes its move, which my thesis is, I call it the red lightning scenario. It's way bigger than Pearl Harbor. It's a mass missile attack, which eradicates American forces inside the second island chain in the first hours of combat. And by then, this is a problem the West faces. We face an onslaught that is so brutal in the opening period that we're going to be very lucky to recover, to come back as we did in World War I and World War II, because of the size of the Chinese industrial base means that, in any extended conflict, as long as they can get their resources to them, which is what the relationship between China and Russia is over land, then they can make their industrial base work. You just have to look at Chinese shipbuilding. It's terrifying in terms of the number of ships it can build and outbuild the rest of the world on a staggering basis.
The South China Seas have missiles directed at Taiwan. The U.S. and Japan have missiles directed at China's missiles, and it's a powder keg ready to blow off. The U.S. has ran war game simulations, and it turns out that the U.S. cannot win. If China were to attack Taiwan, the U.S. would have to accept it unless they escalated to a war with China. That means that chips, semiconductors would be cut off. The majority of weapons have inputs produced in China. There's been a ton of speculation around equities like Nvidia. If chips were cut off, those equities would plummet. Right now, the big tech companies are holding up the stock market indices. If they were to drop drastically, that would cause chaos in the markets.
No, because if you're a Chinese planner and you realize that you are going to do something in Taiwan, you can't take it in a lightning coup in a de facto moment. You have to blockade it, strangle it, get control of American submarines, or at least, fight them back before you get any amphibious force over to the limited beaches. So Taiwan is not a quick take. And in the meantime, you can rest assured the Japanese come to the Taiwanese aid because they realize forward defense is critical for their islands. And if the Japanese move, America has to move. So any Chinese planner that wants to go after Taiwan has to calculate that it's going to face everything. South Korea, Japan, America, Australia, anything that turns up for NATO will all come together, and they don't want that. So far better you just go straight to go and you say, okay, we'll eradicate everything we can inside the second island chain with mass missile forces fired by surprise in saturation. And then what are you going to do? We can take Taiwan whenever we want to. The only thing they then have to deal with is the US Air Force, long-range strikes, and what's left of a submarine fleet, which is less and less operational in the US, has to travel a long way, fire a few missiles and go back. So it looks to me very, very much like the only conclusion, if I was a Chinese planner, was all at once, Pearl Harbor on steroids, do it properly, effectively kill the carriers in harbor, don't let them be out at exercise, so you fight them later on at Midway in the Coral Sea.
When China took Hong Kong, it was swift and quick. There were protests, but the media stopped talking and the politicians stopped caring. When China takes Taiwan, it will be something similar to Hong Kong.
Well, I've got to realize that we don't live in ancient times anymore when there was actually an advantage to be had in invading a country. You got to steal the gold, the cattle, the artwork, and enslave the population. And it worked out. War could be a profitable activity. But in today's high-tech world, those things aren't really values anymore. And it's especially dangerous with the kind of weapons that we have today. I'm not just talking about nuclear weapons, which can clearly destroy the world. I'm talking about cyber weapons, which could destroy the world just in a different way from nuclear weapons. Biological weapons could certainly get the job done. So it's much riskier now than it was then, and there's nothing to be gained. Why would the Russians want to invade Europe and take on a massive guerrilla war for themselves? And most of the wealth in the world is technologically oriented, easily transferred, can't be effectively stolen by armed force.
We can no longer trust centralized servers because they can be hacked. We can no longer trust money because not everybody in the world is aligned with U.S. politics and U.S. values. So what happens when we move into an age with distributed computing where you can make things so secure that it's virtually impossible to be hacked, where you can create value directly on these distributed systems. In my opinion, there needs to be some type of impetus to migrate to this system. So a mass scale attack, hacking wise, and also some type of monetary implosion, some type of economic implosion. And China attacking Taiwan would do both.
I think this is truly the first global war. We tend to think of World War II as global, but there were whole swathes of areas that were left untouched. The magnitude of the Chinese ambition and challenge means nowhere will be left untouched.
What's the portfolio look like to weather the storm, David?
Look, I've been a big fan of precious metals and Bitcoin since 18K.
Okay,
so
those are the lifeboats for you.
I've got more sophisticated versions for my professional money managers, but I'm very careful about talking about what to do, when to do it, because most people then do it late. And all of my clients have basically got in very early at the right stages and are now running their trades.
All right. Okay. Look, David,
I would say this. You don't want to be in the bond markets. Do not think bonds are a safe haven. Do not think the dollar is a safe haven. And do not think equity is a good place to be unless you're in wartime-orientated equity businesses, whether it's defense or resources, in spheres of influence that can be maintained by the West.
If China attacks Taiwan, what happens? Well, all of the products that China exports all over the world all of a sudden stops because now their workforce is dedicated to China winning a war. And now all of the bonds that China owns, they're going to have to liquidate. So the U.S. is going to have to sanction China, which is going to cause some type of confidence erosion in the currency, in the bond market, and that's going to have ripple effects because China is one of the largest holders of U.S. debt.
All of AI is not going to make it through whether we have a recession or not because they haven't separated the wheat from the chaff yet. But I do believe, unlike crypto, I think AI is real. It could be as transformative as the internet. It's a huge thing. And I think I've argued publicly that if staples can go up in price in a recession, why can't a company like Nvidia, if their orders and earnings go up 70% in a hard landing, which is what I think would probably happen, it's not clear that Nvidia goes down despite the lofty valuation level. History has proved if you have very good earnings in a recession and they're sustainable, if they're not, the market somehow figures it out, those stocks will do just fine. So we have some longs, we have some shorts, and the AIs have sort of dominated the long portfolio for 5 or 6 months.
First of all, artificial intelligence and crypto assets complement each other and they go hand in hand. So you've probably heard of AKT, you've probably heard of IONET. These are protocols that allow chips to be used on a grand scale. So everybody's personal computers, render farms, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can contribute these chips to a protocol and it basically makes a supercomputer using personal computers. It's a very powerful technology considering that some of these chips weigh 50 pounds and are millions of dollars coming out of Nvidia just for artificial intelligence. Now, the next thing is artificial intelligence is a complex system that is completely opaque. So if you want properties of crypto like traceability, then you need to apply crypto to artificial intelligence. Taiwan fabricates chips, so if Taiwan starts getting into a war, that means that there's going to be a bottleneck in chips. And then you'll start seeing things like Nvidia, AMD crash because they don't have chips to sell. And this will be a huge problem for people like Larry Fink as well as Dan Druckenmiller that have invested heavily into the AI boom.
It's humiliating. The thing again that's interesting is that, and I would argue, I have argued that, the pandemic was not an accident. It was an intentional release designed to weaken the Western world's debt provision. That's what it was targeted. And it's done it so well because look at the US debt problem. It's going through the roof as we speak. And you can't spend more money on interest than you can spend on defense. Now, that was an intentional stratagem. No one seems to realize what was done to us or don't want to admit to it. And yet fentanyl is exactly the same. It's another stratagem, which is covert, designed to undermine America. And the point is, at what stage do Americans wake up and realize they are consistently under attack? They're under cyber attack. You know, what happened in Baltimore, even if it wasn't an attack, and I have to consider that, you know, someone knows, but on the outside, I think the chances of a ship hitting one of the pillars of a very, very wide bridge, it seems to me a little strange.
The U.S. controlling global monetary policy is a real problem. The U.S. controlling other countries' financial infrastructure, their trade, everything that goes along with having the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency is a massive problem. Right now, Russia is encouraging the BRICS nations to use crypto assets for trade. Now, after Russia was sanctioned, their economy has flourished since then. You don't necessarily need atomic bombs to destroy a nation. Politicians who value their pockets than the life of citizens always do that every day. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon site or my ghost site, dmjr.ghost.io.